from our point of view at the moment, what we're seeing is still quite a lot of yield compression, which some people might take as being quite a negative thing. From our point of view, I think, looking at it in the context of today's subject, what we're seeing from an investor point of view is people increasingly viewing the regions as providing good value for money. So yield compression is one thing, but actually the wider question is what's the yield spread across the market and where are we compared to London, and increasingly where are we around the world. What we're increasingly seeing is at the top end of the market, particularly in sort of like brand new offices in central business districts, the main purchasers are the UK real estate funds, as you might imagine, but actually increasingly sort of foreign investors, particularly from Middle East, Far East, Canada, North America, those sorts of areas. So what does that mean in terms of yields? Traditional sort of CBD, so heartlands of Bristol where I work, Birmingham, Manchester, that sort of thing, you're looking at city centre offices now probably 4.75%. That sounds quite scary if you're like me and you've worked in the regional market for quite a long time, until you suddenly pick up on what Steve said about central London. And then when you look at Munich at 3.5%. The secondary office market is picking up on that, and there's a lot of rental growth in the secondary office markets, principally for two things. Number one, a lack of stock in Grade A, and the second one is the alternative uses, so students and sort of conversion to residential, which has basically dried up that secondary market. So there's an awful lot of rental growth, which has compressed yields further. Industrial is everybody's darling of the market at the moment, has been. It's been outperforming offices for some years now, which is quite incredible, and rental growth is there. So it's not as though people are just buying yields on weights of cash. They are buying it with real rental growth opportunities. So you are seeing rent starting to be £7, £8, £9 a square foot in regional markets. And there's some good opportunities there. So there's still plenty of industrial estates which are at £5, £6 a square foot, plenty of demand, and of course, fantastic tenant mix from a risk point of view. Retail's a slightly more thorny subject. You know, we all can read the press, and you know, there's a lot of CVAs and a lot of trouble on the high street, and it would be wrong to say that there aren't going to be structural voids in regional high streets. They're going to be. There's just not going to be enough shops to fill those up. That said, I think if you pick the right towns, the right locations, and importantly the right retailers, then things are good. There are plenty of success stories. If you look at Primark, for example, 100% cash owned, no debt, and they buy all their properties freehold. How can they not be a success story? So yields are a lot more challenging there in the retail market, and in truth are probably drifting out a little bit at the moment.
It's quite early days, and I think they're already making their impact. And what's really interesting, I think, about the devolution program is actually the Act is very enabling. So the opportunity is absolutely there, and I think the deals that have been done, you know, they hit all Steve's buttons really. You know, they're around the levers that you need, how you drive economic activity, transport, skills, housing and planning. You know, it's not surprising they're all pretty similar, because those are the levers that local leaders need to pull if they're going to create economic wealth and go towards that social inequality that Steve was talking about. So far so good, I think. I think we're on a journey, and I think it's very much up to those local mayors to make it work, and to show that it works, and to earn the right, you know, to take more back, because the more they can take from the centre, I think, the more they'll be able to drive their local economy to be suited to local needs. We also spend a lot of time working with the Department for International Trade, talking to potential investors. And one of the things I think that the firm of Beaufort has the opportunity to do is to unlock the mismatch that sometimes exists between the fact that, you know, a lot of these decisions are very local, and a lot of these projects are very local and quite small scale to a global investor, whereas they're looking for scale opportunities to invest. So you've got this £100 million barrier where, you know, a lot of the projects are below that, but a lot of the investors say, well, we don't want to look at anything below 100 million. We want scale. So how do you kind of create enough scale and enough vision? Because they also want vision. They don't just want to invest their money. They want to invest in a proposition that excites them. That's not just about building stuff, but it's about the connectivity. It's about what you're doing for people's lives. It's about creating communities. So I think, you know, that's the opportunity. The challenge is to sort of bring those things together.
I think in many of the cities where, you know, further north where we've been very active, is really the strength of the regional mayors, and I think a very clear, consistent vision that they share with the council leader. And part of that, it is about connectivity, absolutely, transport. And it's interesting how those cities have died in the centre and spread out to the suburbs, and now it's about coming back near the railway station. And half that requires completely changing the place. Glasgow's just secured a 1.2 billion City Deal fund to improve its streets in the city itself, the public realm, making it a pleasant place for visitors from overseas cities to visit at the weekend, not the traditional Glasgow street you would have seen back in the 80s. So it's a strong regional vision that joins up with the leader of the council. But Manchester's great success is that long continuity between leader and chief executive, but also actually that investment in public realm, making the city a lovely place to be at day and night. Cities are 7-day, 24-hour places.
In terms of geographical diversity outside of London, I actually started investing in purpose-built student accommodation in Newcastle and in the territories initially back 30, 40, 15 years ago, when the sector was very, very embryonic. But people often talk about Oxford and Cambridge, and they talk about Russell Group universities. And surprisingly, some of those things that seem intuitive just aren't. So in Oxford and Cambridge, actually, you think, let's invest in student accommodation in Oxford and Cambridge, and when you get there and you start trying to let rooms, you realise that everybody in Oxford and Cambridge wants to live in college, not in purpose-built student accommodation. So what you're in fact doing is you're investing in 2 secondary universities, and Andy Ruskin University, in one example. And that's if you saw that university on its own in a town with very high land prices, I'm not convinced you would be going there and developing purpose-built student accommodation. Now, if you look at a city with 2 universities, like let's take Newcastle as an example. Newcastle University, a very strong red brick, Russell Group University, and Northumbria University, a former polytechnic. Actually, all of the growth in the past 10 years has come at Northumbria University and not Newcastle. So one might contend that in an extremely negative downturn, then the red bricks would be more financially secure than possibly the new universities. But actually, in terms of the growth, that's kind of not been the case. This year has been the toughest year to date for purpose-built student accommodation occupancy because of additional supply coming online and the lag effect of people investing in purpose-built student accommodation. But actually, this year we're in a perfect storm of the smallest number of 18-year-olds ever, the real demographic dip, which will continue for about another 18 months or so, and then we're out the side of that. That had no meaningful effect on university applications. So this year we're seeing real change in the sector, which is going to take a year or so to wash out. But in general, the principles are very, very strong.
I think the real issue is resourcing. Local authority planning resourcing has been stripped out and stripped out and stripped out. And that's just as much of a problem for the private sector as it is for them, because you lose the quantity and the capacity, but you also lose the skills. And actually that's at 2 levels. I mean, that's the skills and the capacity to deal with the throughput of planning applications, but that's also, and critically I think, you lose the vision of planning. You lose the people who can have the ability to, and the time to stand back and really be what planners ought to be, which is absolutely contributing and central to creating the vision of place for an area. So we see the resourcing of planning both at the strategic level and at the operational level as an absolutely critical issue that collectively we have to find a way of solving. So how do you find a way of putting more resource in that deals with those accountability concerns? It's one of the things we've been talking to MHCLG about, and it's one of the things that we've made a proposal to government under the industrial strategy for a sector deal for real estate, and it's one of the things that we talk about in there. How do we find a way through that?
I think we've really witnessed that in the regions, the cities, because public realm's coming together, connectivity's coming together, it's also actually a pleasant place to go for a weekend. So actually, and I think because of the exchange rate, I think the city break is really here to stay. And I think actually the regional cities are a lot easier to cover a few square miles than a daunting place such as London, and half the price. And I think the other thing is also very much a little bit what Steve was saying. It's interesting, the decision for Barclays to form 2,500 new jobs in Glasgow very recently. And what that means, I I travel the country, those planes are filling up now. And it's filling up from those executives that are working in London, in the office in Holborn Street, now travelling up to Glasgow and having to stay in the hotels 2 or 3 days there rather than coming down to Reading where the former HQ was. There's a shift in the corporate week rates with central management going to where the workplace is, and I think it's also actually the city break.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So at the Nido collection, we're also investing in co-living, which is kind of, I guess some people have described it as student accommodation for grown-ups. So it's a similar sort of concept where you forego a little bit of your internal room area for some more shared common space. And we think it's very attractive to millennials. It's very attractive to people who want a greater sense of community, and we think it's very accretive. You can get a higher density on a particular plot and perhaps make it more viable. But you have to be very careful. These are very specific, location specific. We think in general with co-living it's very much a city-centred product. We think good transport links are essential. We think people are less likely to drive cars. We like areas with a lot of millennials, relatively high wages, relatively high graduate retention rates. So quite often you're in a similar environment to student accommodation. What we have real difficulty with at the moment is planners understanding it, HMRC understanding it. So all of the systems of government who desperately require additional accommodation on a finite piece of land, desperately require people to walk to work, cycle to work. All of this is all accretive to that, but they're in the same breath, they're unwilling to engage in sensible conversations around this higher density housing stock.
I think there's a real challenge to the tension is, that space standards, so how big the spaces that you're living in has been totally conflated with the quality of what you're living in. So I think there's still a huge education job to be done to showcase the quality of what's on offer, even perhaps in a different way, and to change perceptions of what that really means. Because I think there's a huge perception still of what that all means is you're cramming more people in, and therefore automatically the quality of their accommodation, the quality of their experience will be lower.
I think you've got to be a bit careful about saying where's the market hot and where's the market not. And if I can answer the question by turning it on its head, I think where I would be looking at is where things have clearly happened an awful lot of, if somebody's spotted a good idea, don't be the first in, maybe be the second in, don't be the fifth in, is probably the best way to. We already have seen foreign investment going into Birmingham and Manchester, for example. So, it may be that there are certain pockets there where you can see opportunity. But then if you sort of look at the sort of hierarchy of regional cities, and then you say, look at, say, Leeds or Birmingham, Cardiff or Glasgow and Edinburgh, as just been mentioned by Clive, you can see that these cities have very much got their acts together and are probably in that next phase ready to go. It's very easy in the property industry, we get all self-consumed with property and rents and yields and take-up stats and all that sort of stuff. But we've got to remember that the bulk of property is basically an envelope for a process. So that process is either because you live there or because you work there. And so the cities that enable living and working through all the things that we've all discussed this morning can only be the ones that succeed. And so cities that don't offer those things, jobs, infrastructure, education, retention of student talent, those sorts of things, are going to be the ones where I would avoid. You look at Bristol with the media and so on and so forth, really popular. Look at Channel 4, look at BBC in Cardiff, look at material science in Birmingham, and look at life sciences in Manchester. There's a lot of other stuff going on, not just big investments in banks.